Story 1. Dear Eerie Encounters team, I recently watched one of your videos where a viewer shared their eerie experience. It resonated deeply with me, prompting me to share my own extraordinary encounter. Since it has been many years, I do believe on the condition of anonymity. It would be safe to share this story with you. I won't be using our real names, though. Simply call me Pierre. I worked as a scientist. A long time ago, I was stationed at a remote research facility on Kerguelen Island. This desolate and windswept place is one of the most isolated on Earth, ideal for our climate and geological research, but also, as it turned out, a hotspot for the inexplicable. It was a summer's day when my colleague Odette and I embarked on a field research trip far from Port-au-Français, which is what the base is called. The day began uneventfully as we collected rock samples and gathered data for our study. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the rugged landscape, something peculiar caught our attention on a nearby beach. It appeared to be a heap of objects. Most beaches on Kerguelen are bustling with colonies of marine animals like sea lions, penguins, and others as summer is breeding season. Despite this beach being on the smaller side, it struck us as eerie that there were no animals in the vicinity whatsoever. We approached the heap cautiously, and what we discovered was grisly and repulsive. The heap of objects turned out to be a collection of body parts and carcasses from various marine animals, mammals, crustaceans, birds, octopi, penguins, fish, jellyfish, shellfish, and more. It was the vilest thing I have ever seen. I felt sick to my stomach. Besides the bizarre occurrence of finding such a collection of mutilated creatures in one spot, there were several other strange irregularities. All the creatures were dismembered with surgical precision, displaying cuts that were the most precise I had ever seen. These were not caused by any natural process. It seemed as though someone had dumped the creatures as one would with a dumping truck. Yet there were no such vehicles on Kerguelen Island, no conceivable way for such a vehicle to access the area, and no tire or footprints present anywhere. We both deduced that they must have been dropped from a hovering vehicle only a few meters above the ground. However, there was none of the typical wind blast damage that a helicopter's rotor would cause to the nearby flora or the sand. The carcasses appeared fresh, indicating that this event had occurred recently. Yet perhaps the strangest aspect of all was that this potential feast of meat did not attract a single carnivore or scavenger on an island teeming with such animals, not even a single crab. In fact, it seemed as though all creatures kept well clear of the beach. Both of us were thoroughly puzzled, and as we grasped the strangeness of the phenomenon, an eerie feeling settled over us. There was an ominous atmosphere lingering in the entire cove where this small beach was situated. Then we noticed another strange phenomenon. As we stood there, trying to make sense of the mutilation, we observed two cylindrical objects hovering in the distance. They moved slowly with an eerie smoothness, unlike any aircraft we had ever seen. They hovered above the landscape, but with no point of reference, we had no idea how far away they were. The craft then appeared to land, but as they did, they vanished from sight due to the irregular terrain. I quickly grabbed my camera with a telescopic lens and managed to snap 2 shots before they disappeared completely. Our sense of unease grew, and we decided to head back to Port-au-Français and report what we had seen. However, our journey back took an even more sinister turn. I grabbed the VHF radio we had brought along and tried to contact the base to send a helicopter, but all I could get was static. As we made our way across the uneven rocky landscape, we felt an unsettling presence, the distinct feeling of being watched and followed. We still had a long way to go, about an hour on foot to reach the base. We've stayed out longer than we should have. After about 10 minutes, Odette, who was glancing back frequently, suddenly grabbed my arm and said, "They're following us." I turned, and what I saw thoroughly unnerved me. About 500 meters away, there were four figures. I took out the binoculars. What I saw shocked me. They were green-grayish in color, with heads that seemed thoroughly reptilian, matching the shade of the bodysuits they were wearing. I said to Odette, "We need to run," but she insisted on also taking a look with the binoculars. She looked for barely a couple of seconds before clenching my arm and murmuring, "Oh God, what is that?" Understanding the urgency, I told her we needed to drop our backpacks with our equipment and samples and start running, which we did immediately. Navigating the rough terrain without a clear path was challenging. Every now and then we glanced back, only to see those figures closing the distance between us. They were clearly faster than us, and a horrifying thought crossed my mind that we might end up like the mutilated carcasses we had seen on the beach. When they closed the distance to only about 200 meters behind us, they seemed to slow their pace to match ours. By this time, we were thoroughly horrified. Seeing them maintain the gap between us brought a sense of relief, though by no means comfort. For a moment, I entertained the chilling thought that they might be herding us into an ambush. It was dusk when we finally spotted Port-au-Français. The view of the base in the distance filled us with hope. As we approached within a kilometer of the base, they abruptly stopped pursuing us. Desperate and terrified, we sprinted the final stretch and burst into the base, immediately reporting our harrowing encounter to the head of the mission. I also told him about the pictures I had managed to capture of the two disc-shaped craft earlier. He instructed us to maintain absolute silence about the incident, to prevent alarming the other members of the mission on the island. He assured us that he would report the incident to his superiors in Paris, to determine if there was any potential threat posed by what we had witnessed. This seemed illogical to us. To Odette and I, it was clear the beings are hostile and thus a threat. Yet, despite the gravity of the situation, he appeared remarkably composed. Later that evening, he summoned us to his office where we joined a satellite radio call with our headquarters in Paris. This was before the internet. To our surprise, the meeting was attended by both the Administrator Superior of the Southern and Antarctic Lands Department as well as his boss, the Minister of Overseas France. Clearly, we have encountered something of great significance. The minister took charge of the conversation, emphasizing in no uncertain terms that the incident was not to be discussed further. He ordered that all reports we had written be destroyed and insisted that it would be in our best interest to forget the entire ordeal. In a dismissive tone, he added, "Don't let your imaginations run away with you. This never happened, and you will erase it from your thoughts." After that, the base security officer thoroughly searched both Odette's and my quarters. He confiscated our cameras, returning them the next day without the film cartridges. Thus, I lost the pictures I took of the hovering cylinder-shaped craft. For days afterward, we couldn't shake the unnerving feeling of being watched. This experience has haunted me ever since. The profound isolation of Kerguelen Island, coupled with the inexplicable events we witnessed, made it a truly harrowing ordeal. Yet what gets to me most is that, after all these years, I still have nightmares about the heap of carnage we found on that life-deserted beach. In the dream, I am always being chased and hunted by reptilian monsters. I feel like that sickening experience has scarred me forever. Despite the horror it has caused me, I still ponder why those beings stopped closing the distance between us. They could have easily caught up with us long before we got to the base. Were they trying to do us harm, or were they merely chasing us to scare us? I have so many questions. What was the heap of marine animal carnage we saw on that remote beach? Did the reptilians cause that, and for what purpose? Are these alien creatures biological researchers from another world, or are they vicious predators? Another question that deeply bothers me to this day is the apparent cover-up by my superiors and our government. What was that about? To these and many other questions, I will never have the answers. The entire episode remains both an emotional and intellectual frustration. I will never understand what happened there. Sincerely, Pierre. Story 2. Hi, simply call me Oleg. This is a long story, so I am writing it in a series of emails, rather than all at once. Please integrate them into one narration, and feel free to improve my style. I am not a natural storyteller, but I'd appreciate it if I could approve your final version. Anyway, let me begin. The story I am about to tell you comes from my grandmother, whom we lovingly called Baba, which is short for Babushka. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, me, my parents, my brother, and my maternal grandparents all left Moscow for the U.S. About a year later, my grandfather passed away. While her husband, my grandfather, had cancer, Baba spent all her time taking care of him and managing the household while both my parents worked. After that, my grandmother and I became very close. We were close before, but with my grandfather gone, she started focusing more on her grandchildren, me and my brother Sasha. My brother and I were in our early teens at that time. While my parents came home late from work, Baba would see to our needs, cooking, clean clothing, and more. She was quite a deep thinker, which is maybe why she and I connected so well. Sasha, on the other hand, was not so interested in Baba's stories. He was very much into his sports. We always knew Baba worked for some government ministry, but we never knew exactly what she did. In the Soviet Union, everyone was a civil servant, so that was very normal. However, during one conversation, I discovered that Baba worked for the KGB. Being interested in anything involving intrigue, mention of the KGB sparked my interest in her career history. One evening at the dinner table, Sasha made fun of a UFO-related program on TV. Baba warned him not to laugh. I could see she wanted to say something, but Mama gave her the look. Yet, Baba's reaction to Sasha's flippant remarks puzzled me. I later found out that Mama knew that Baba worked for an experimental unit within the KGB, but was never allowed to discuss the finer details with her family. I now also understand that the little bit Mama did know made her uncomfortable and so discouraged Baba from ever talking about it with us. The next day after school, I asked Baba why she was annoyed with Sasha laughing at the mention of aliens and UFOs on television. It turns out Baba worked for a special department in the KGB that investigated supernatural phenomena, etc. This piqued my interest, and over the weeks and months to come, I asked her many questions, and she shared a lot with me. Of course, I can't remember all the details she told me. She began her career with the KGB in her late 20s. Trained as a psychologist, Baba joined the specialized department to leverage her expertise. Her dual reporting lines were to both the department's commanding officer and the party. Her primary responsibility included monitoring the mental well-being of team members, crucial given the extraordinary situations they encountered. Additionally, she oversaw the induction of internal recruits. To supplement her duties, she managed all administrative tasks within the team, effectively serving as the commanding officer's de facto personal assistant. This role granted her access to a trove of information about individuals and numerous peculiar projects and incidents. The particular department conducted extensive research on various topics, particularly UFOs, and it went beyond mere research. One of the things she told me is that UFOs are not a new phenomenon. They have been around throughout human history and likely even prehistory. She also said they had artifacts, some technological, though extremely decayed. These artifacts were sourced from across the vast territories of the USSR, previously the Russian Empire and beyond. Apparently, much of it had been in a collection owned by the Tsars and also the Russian Orthodox Church before the 1917 revolution. A quick request: if you haven't subscribed yet and you value our videos, please hit the subscribe and like buttons and leave a comment below. It means the world to us. Now, let's return to our story. An extraordinary conclusion they reached from the earliest records, spanning ages up to modern observations, was the apparent lack of technological progress among these UFOs over millennia. They theorized that time travel might be involved, which could explain the lack of technological evolution over time. Either that, or wherever they are from, time is passing at a much slower rate. As in the rest of the world, abductions were also a phenomenon in the USSR. Similar to the West, Soviet citizens were not forthcoming about their experiences. While in the West experiencers often fear ridicule, in the Soviet Union the fear was more existential. People who claimed to have had encounters with aliens were labeled insane and got institutionalized, never to be free again. UFO activities increased during the Great Patriotic War, known as the Second World War in the West, and remained at that level afterwards. However, a year before the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb, the activity drastically increased. She said the UFO operators knew in advance what we were up to. As the USSR built up its nuclear arsenal, UFO activity and abductions increased. By the late 1950s, UFO activities at Soviet nuclear weapons facilities had become problematic. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev insisted that the KGB and the army find out what was happening, determine whether it posed a threat, and take action if necessary. Of course, the Soviets were also interested in the technology involved. Baba said they discovered from their American operatives that the Americans had been in so-called diplomatic contact with these entities since the Eisenhower administration. Khrushchev was apparently beside himself, according to a note she saw, as the USSR had no such contact. This prompted the need to establish communication with these entities. Receiving this order was both an exciting opportunity and a massive challenge. How to achieve such contact was a mystery by itself. However, the prospect of such communication promised valuable information about UFOs and their operators. Making contact was challenging. While Baba was not part of these operations, her administrative and support roles granted her access to a lot of classified information. Locating UFO activities ranged from easy to difficult, and various radio signals were sent in attempts to make contact. Even though Baba was no longer working for the KGB or living in Russia, she withheld some information from me. I sometimes think it was for two reasons: to protect me, and I have a suspicion that some of it was pretty dark and didn't sit well with her. None of the electronic technologies they tried for making contact delivered any results. In the early 1960s, they resorted to another joint military KGB program that used psychics to spy on the USA through deep meditative states. This is when they started having success. These operatives made contact with the entities on their first attempt. A protocol was then established for further communication, and from there, progress moved quickly. Soon the first face-to-face meeting with the entities was arranged. Baba was not present at these meetings, but she was responsible for collating and integrating all the reports from those involved. She mentioned there were only 2 face-to-face meetings in the first year, and in the subsequent years never more than 1 meeting per year. Not all information passed through her hands. Some of it was deemed so highly classified that only the head of the unit and the agents directly involved had access. I regrettably never asked how she knew this. I was only a teenager at the time. Though she shared these stories as a way to bond with me, recognizing my keen interest, I think it was also a means for her to process the past. In the U.S., she was in a different world and time and could talk about things that previously would have put her in a labor camp at least. Baba was never nostalgic about the Soviet Union. She was clearly very happy to be away from the KGB's grip. She once told me, "One never truly retires from the KGB." She explained that even though she was never an agent, after her retirement she was expected to keep tabs on the neighbors and report any strange activities. She hated it. The collapse of the USSR, the chaos in the following months, our emigration, and the dissolution of the KGB in 1991 meant she was free. She was the one who pushed my parents to get jobs in the U.S. so that we could all get out. There were a lot of things she did not want to talk about. She was terrified the Communist Party might somehow regain power. She only gave me morsels of what the agreements with the entities or UFO aliens involved. She said a deal was struck because the Soviets feared the entities were providing strategic information about their nuclear missile bases to the Americans. Up to that point, Soviet jets were scrambled whenever UFO blips appeared on radar. The MiGs and Sukhois, of course, were no match for the strange and fast maneuvers of the UFOs. However, in a few instances, missiles fired by these jets did hit UFO craft. At least one was shot down. Some were apparently damaged but did not come down. Generally, the chances of jets bringing down a UFO were very remote, but even that risk must have been unacceptable to their operators. Both sides wanted something, and both sides had something to give. An agreement was reached allowing the UFOs to operate freely in exchange for information on American strategic capabilities. Baba said it was ironic, as they were convinced the entities made the same deal with the Americans. She hinted at other details in the agreement, details that brought her to silence. She then seemed very depressed and changed the topic. She did reveal, as one might imagine, that after the agreement, reports of abductions increased significantly, even though Soviet citizens were generally not very forthcoming. Regarding how information about the Americans was shared, she said it was done in various ways. Sometimes it was relayed via the psychics. Other times, agents would receive phone calls where the person on the other side would speak to them, either in their own voice or the voice of a deceased loved one. At first, the agents found it quite disturbing, especially if it was a deceased family member's voice. Only once was she taken along to a face-to-face meeting with the entities. There was concern in the Kremlin as to how the negotiators were interacting with the entities, and thus, as psychologist, with the required clearance and knowledge of the subject matter, she was tasked to do a first-hand observation. She described it as the most surreal experience of her life. The whole event took place in a hangar at a secret Air Force base outside Moscow. These secret bases were scattered throughout the USSR. They arrived before the visitors. Tables were set out in the hangar. Humans would sit on one side and the visitors on the other. As they waited at the table, the phone rang, informing them that the visitors had arrived. She did not see the craft land. She mentioned, besides herself, the attendees were 2 senior agents and other high-ranking officials from the Kremlin, the KGB, and the military. Everyone went silent when the visitors came in. There were only 4 of them, accompanied by 2 Air Force officers guiding them to the table. Their footsteps were the only sound echoing through the vast hangar. It was an odd sight. They were short, the size of elementary school children, dressed in what seemed to be one-piece suits made from a black fabric. It had no collars or such. She said the sight of their huge bulbous heads and large black eyes sent shivers down her neck. She also mentioned something about their digits, though I can't recall if it was too many or too few. The chairs were almost too high for them, but they managed to take their seats much like children. Baba said the entities never appeared intimidated by the disproportionate human presence or our weapons. The humans spoke verbally, but the visitors communicated telepathically, and only to those they intended to hear their messages. Only the high-ranking officials at the table received their communications. She and the general's aide-de-camp were excluded. She couldn't assess the visitors' behavior, and that was in any case not her task. However, she still tried, but found it hard since she had no idea what they were communicating, and because they were so strange. So, she kept her focus on her task, which was to monitor her colleagues. The KGB agents did most of the talking and seemed superb at handling the situation, never appearing unnerved. However, she noted that the Kremlin official, and to a lesser extent the one general, seemed a little on edge. She recommended in her report that they be better prepared for dealing with non-human entities in future meetings. Furthermore, she said that one of the entities looked her way several times, which made her quite uncomfortable. Though she couldn't be certain it was looking directly at her, as their eyes lacked visible pupils and she couldn't pinpoint their gaze, she could feel her thoughts being scanned. It was the strangest feeling of her life. She described it as an echo in her thoughts, which at times impeded her from her monitoring role. She felt thoroughly unnerved when this happened, but managed to hide it well from her colleagues, thanks to her training. However, she was pretty sure the entity knew exactly what she was experiencing. There's much more to share about this event, but it's getting long, so I will only mention 2 more things about it. Baba mentioned an interesting personal observation. She said that the moment those entities entered the room, despite having no outward signs of gender, she immediately felt they emanated a female presence. She attributed this to her own female intuition, as the men had no idea what gender the entities were. The most staggering of her intuitive senses, however, was this. As strange as they were, there was something terribly familiar about them, like they belonged here, like they were part of us. Baba said that experience had a significant impact on her life. She mentioned that in the years that followed, they discovered the information provided by the entities about the U.S. military was generally of little value. It was either information they already knew or simply low-value data. It seemed like the entities were deliberately withholding much from them. Through strategically positioned agents in the U.S., the KGB learned that the entities were playing the Americans in the same way. Baba concluded that the entities exploited the mistrust between the USA and USSR to gain unchallenged access to our airspace and other concessions. The USSR received little in return. She said it often seemed as though the entities were deliberately trying to confuse the humans with contradictory information. She would say with a sense of repulsion, "It seemed they wanted access to our minds, and we gave it to them." Her assessment of them was that they were deceitful and seemed to enjoy misleading the humans. She often fell silent, mentioning her serious upset with some of the agreements reached with them, but she had no authority to express her views. She never elaborated, becoming very sad and quiet instead. There were terrible things she hinted at but never fully explained. She said her seniors felt frustrated by their interactions with the entities, and over the years, the entire project failed and was abandoned in phases, or at least that's what she was led to believe. It was not uncommon for some secret projects to be shut down and then simply reopened under a different cell within the KGB. This ensured that the lower echelons, like herself, lost track of a project's progress. In a totalitarian system like the USSR, having many people know only bits and pieces was seen as less of a threat than having a few people know too much. Those who knew only fragments of information would never speak out for fear of ending up in a labor camp, or worse, while those who knew too much would have enormous leverage to gain control over their superiors. Baba said only the highest-ranking officials really knew what happened with the project, but she was gradually moved on to other projects of a less strange nature. Given her central administrative role in the unit, I sensed that Baba knew more than she should have, which might explain why she feared the KGB all her life. Baba passed away in 2000, and I regret not having the foresight to write down or audio record her experiences at the KGB. I believe a great deal of valuable and interesting information went to the grave with her. Regards, Oleg. Story 3. Hi there. After reading a viewer's comment on one of your videos about a strange experience they had with a family member, I noticed striking parallels to my own experience and decided to share it with you. My family owns a beach house in a small coastal town on the Mexican Gulf. I'll keep the town's name confidential to protect the locals and preserve its peaceful atmosphere from potential UFO hunters. For the sake of anonymity, I have replaced our actual names with pseudonyms. One summer vacation while visiting our holiday home, my little brother and I had a very strange experience. Jimmy, a latecomer or caboose baby, is 14 years younger than my sister Samantha, who is 4 years younger than me. Jimmy adored me and we cherished him deeply, as one does with a much younger sibling. Unfortunately, Jimmy suffered from a very dangerous condition. At the age of 5, he was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm. Due to its size and position in the brain, the surgeons felt that operating would be more dangerous than letting him live with it. Some aneurysms, due to their location or size, are deemed too risky for surgery because accessing them surgically could cause significant harm. Jimmy fell into this category. Living with the knowledge that Jimmy could die at any day and any moment was a terrible ordeal for my parents and the entire family. One night, Jimmy and I went for a walk on the beach. It was pretty late, around 10 o'clock, but my parents allowed Jimmy to stay up later during holidays. He was only 6 years old. It was a warm summer evening when we spotted something strange. As we walked along the beach with the waves washing around our feet, Jimmy pointed out a bluish light over the water. At first, it seemed like a star, but it quickly became clear that it was not far off in the distance but very close to us. It started as a dot of light, then gradually expanded into a circle. We stood there in awe, watching this incredible sight on a tranquil evening with the water around our feet. It was both scary and immensely beautiful. Then something truly awesome happened. Hundreds of little lights emerged from the circle. Later, I thought of the circle of light as a sort of portal that allowed these little lights to enter our world. They looked almost like fireflies, but fireflies don't come from a light portal. They don't normally fly over the sea, and they certainly don't have a bluish tint. These little points of light floated in the air about a meter above the water, gently moving around as they dispersed. Meanwhile, the circle or portal closed up. The little lights then started moving towards each other, still over the water. Gradually, they coalesced into one huge orb of light. At this point, I told Jimmy that we should probably leave. However, Jimmy was not scared at all. He seemed completely mesmerized by the sight. The light orb suddenly moved towards us. I was horrified. Before I could grab Jimmy to run, it came right up to us, pushing me away and completely enveloping him. I fell backwards onto the sand. As I lay there looking at it, the light flashed incredibly bright, to the extent that I could not see my little brother, only the intense light. I was terrified. In that light, which had the force to throw me across the sand, was my little brother, whom I cared for deeply. This lasted only a few seconds. Then the light started losing its intensity, and the next moment it seemed like static on an old television screen, before it fragmented back into hundreds of separate little points of light. I noticed my little brother's body lying on the sand. As I got back onto my feet, this swarm of light started moving rapidly, forming a long, stretched-out line-shaped formation heading back toward the portal that had silently opened behind me. I rushed to Jimmy, who was coming too. He seemed a bit dazed. I wanted to carry him, but he insisted on walking. I was shocked at what had happened, but besides a bit of a dazed state, Jimmy seemed completely fine. He was totally unperturbed. Eventually, I insisted on carrying him home, which is about a 10-minute walk from where this happened, and he allowed me to do so. During our walk, neither Jimmy nor I spoke about what had happened. When we got home, he said he wanted to go to bed. I greeted our parents as we entered the house and immediately took him to his room, tucking him in for the night. As I came back downstairs, Mom asked why Jimmy was not taking a bath, but I assured her he was tired and should bathe in the morning. Obviously, I yearned to tell my parents about what happened, but then I thought about how unbelievable the entire event sounded. If they didn't believe me, they might think I was making it up, and if they did believe me, they would be terrified about what happened to Jimmy. So, I decided to calm down and say nothing. Believe me, that was really hard. The next day, Jimmy seemed fine, energetic, and playful as usual. I gently asked him about the previous evening, but he had no recall of the lights or the event. About a month later, Jimmy had his regular checkup at the neurology clinic. My mom and Samantha took him that day while Dad was at work. The clinic made a surprising discovery. Jimmy's aneurysm had completely disappeared. The brain tissue that was once displaced by it had now filled the space where the aneurysm was. A few weeks later, my mother shared with me that on the day she and my sister brought Jimmy back from the clinic, she was a bit surprised. Jimmy didn't seem as excited about the news as she and Samantha were. At first, she thought maybe Jimmy, being a little boy, didn't fully understand the significance of the diagnosis. She asked him if he was surprised or happy about what the doctors had found. Jimmy responded, saying, "But I already knew, because the man in the light told me they were fixing me." Intrigued, she asked him who he meant by the man in the light, and all Jimmy said was, "At night, on the beach." She chalked it up to a child's vivid imagination and left it at that. When she told me this, I felt compelled to share the whole story of the event Jimmy and I experienced at the beach with both my mother and father. My mother believes me, but my dad remains skeptical, simply saying, "I'm sure you guys experienced something." I tried to approach the topic with Jimmy later on, but he seemed completely unaware of what I was referring to. Jimmy recently graduated as an architect. He leads a vibrant and healthy life. We haven't revisited the topic of that night since, but whatever happened there, I believe it healed him and paved the way for his future. Sincerely, Arnold. Story 4. Hello. I apologize for writing this in Spanish, but if you're reading it in English, you've obviously managed to translate it. Please edit the style as you see fit. Let me start. I am sharing a story that has been a secret in my family for a very long time. This story was shared with me by my mother, Rosario, who was the youngest daughter of a wealthy cattle farmer in the Pampas. My mother was the youngest of 10 siblings, with 7 sisters and 2 brothers. The eldest was Valentina, followed by Juan, and then Diego. The rest were all sisters. My grandfather was Carlos, and my grandmother was Sofia. To avoid using generational titles, I will henceforth refer to them by name. When Valentina was 14 years old, she would assist her mother with the household, as was customary in large families back then. Even in families who could afford servants, this was the custom. When Rosario was born, her mother could not nurse her due to having glandular fever. From her birth, Rosario was nursed on cow's milk and nurtured by Valentina, resulting in a stronger bond between them than with her mother. The Argentine Pampas, the region where the family lived, is a grassy landscape ideal for cattle farming. The vast plains are only occasionally interrupted by low-lying hills. Due to the large ranches in the region, it was sparsely populated. The homestead, with its complex of barns and quarters for maids and laborers, was many miles away from the nearest neighbors or town. Because of this distance, Carlos hired a full-time teacher and set up a small school on the farm for his children and those of the laborers. The men who worked for Carlos did not like venturing into the hilly area when cattle strayed there. Carlos's exceptionally large farm included an area with these low-lying hills, though far in the distance provided good vistas from the veranda of the main homestead. The men mentioned seeing strange lights in that area at night. Up to that point, neither Carlos nor his family had seen anything unusual, so Carlos, a hard and staunch man, would become very angry at the men and their tales. However, Carlos's view on the men's fear changed when he once saw the lights over the hills when standing on the veranda of their large villa one evening, smoking his pipe. He and the family were sitting on the veranda after dinner, enjoying the warm summer evening. Despite this sighting, Carlos did not ascribe any supernatural meaning to it. He did not believe in such things. In fact, he did not even believe in God. Sophia and the children went to Mass on Sundays without him. Although the rest of the family also saw the lights, which scared the smaller children, Carlos dismissed the lights as a natural phenomenon, possibly related to the magnetic fields in the hills, something he believed geologists of the future would be able to explain. A week later, an even stranger event took place. It was very late at night, and everyone was already asleep when the family was woken by an intense light coming from the garden. As they gathered on the veranda to see what was happening, they saw an orb of light, similar to those they had seen darting over the hills the previous week, hovering over their garden. Sophia and the children immediately started to pray, believing it to be an angelic appearance. The orb emitted static electricity, causing the girls' long hair to stand on end. It hovered for a while before shooting off in the direction of the hills. The family was quite shaken by the event, but eventually went back to sleep and continued with their lives afterward. In the summer of 1940, Valentina turned 19. Her parents were keen for her to find a well-to-do suitor. With Carlos being a wealthy and land-rich farmer, he was confident that his eldest daughter, a fair maiden, would find an upcoming young farmer in the district. However, about a month after the mysterious orb-like light hovered over the garden, they noticed that Valentina was not well. At first, they thought she might have an illness of a passing nature. As the weeks went by and Valentina continued to fall ill every morning, Carlos became concerned not only for her health, but also about the possibility that a sickly girl would struggle to find a husband. When Valentina's condition did not improve, Carlos called the doctor. After the doctor left, Rosario remembers both Carlos and Sophia being very upset. Valentina was summoned to Carlos's study. The doors were closed. All the children were sent to their rooms. Harsh words were heard from the study. My mother, Rosario, who was only 5 years old at the time, could not make sense of it, but remembers the loud shouting as one of her early memories. The ordeal of hearing her beloved eldest sister getting a severe scolding from their father left a painful imprint on her. In the period that followed, there was a somber mood in the house. The atmosphere was heavy with tension and worry, and the family struggled to understand and cope with the situation. Valentina's illness and the mysterious events surrounding the lights in the hills cast a long shadow over the household, altering the once harmonious family dynamic. About 2 months later, one evening at the dinner table, Carlos sent the maids who usually served at dinner to their quarters. He then announced to the family that Valentina had brought disgrace upon the family. As the father, responsible for protecting the family's standing, he had made the decision that Valentina would no longer be allowed to venture outside the house. Because of this, 5-year-old Rosario understood that disgrace was something that happened when one got ill and did not recover. Valentina was to be seen only by the family, the two maids, and the elderly houseboy, Ricardo. Everyone was sworn to absolute secrecy. Thus, Valentina became a prisoner of her presumed indiscretion. No one was to discuss Valentina's situation with each other, and certainly not with anyone from outside. Rosario remembers Valentina telling her, in a moment of care, that no matter what anyone ever tells her, she must always remember that Valentina had never been with any man. Of course, little Rosario did not understand what "with a man" meant. Living in a house with a father and 2 brothers, and with 7 permanent male laborers on the ranch, they were constantly around men. Rosario decided that her sister's illness made her say strange things. As time went on, the family adapted to this new reality. Valentina's confinement and the mysterious circumstances surrounding it became a part of their daily lives. Rosario, with her childlike innocence, continued to love and support her sister, even as the rest of the family struggled with the weight of the unspoken shame and the secrets that now shadowed their lives. However, Valentina's situation grew more complicated. Her health seemed to fluctuate inexplicably. One moment she would appear almost normal, the next she would be bedridden, gripped by a strange malaise the family doctor couldn't adequately explain. He couldn't find any logical cause and was increasingly mystified, as the symptoms did not match that of a person who were in the same so-called condition. One evening, as Rosario sat with Valentina in her room, the older sister confided in her again. This time, Valentina spoke of dreams, vivid, disturbing dreams of the lights in the hills and the orb that had hovered over the garden. She described being enveloped in a blinding light and feeling an intense, almost electric energy coursing through her body. Valentina's voice trembled as she recounted these experiences, and Rosario, though still too young to fully grasp the implications, felt a deep sense of fear and confusion. Valentina's health continued to decline, and the mysterious lights in the hills seemed to grow more frequent, casting an eerie glow over the ranch at night. The laborers whispered amongst themselves, their fear of the hills intensifying. Carlos, though still outwardly dismissive of any supernatural explanations, could not ignore the growing unease among his workers and within his own family. As months passed, the once vibrant and joyous household became a place of quiet desperation and unspoken questions. The events that had unfolded, the lights, Valentina's so-called illness, and the family's enforced silence, had woven a web of mystery and fear that ensnared them all. With no one talking about the situation, Rosario could not learn much. She continued to watch, while her love for Valentina remained undiminished by the strange and troubling circumstances that now defined their lives. Over the months that followed, Rosario watched as Valentina's belly grew larger, not understanding what was happening, but knowing she was not allowed to ask questions. About 5 months into Valentina's condition, trucks and equipment from a construction company showed up. Rosario remembers the sense of relief that Carlos seemed to display, telling the man with the papers that he had been waiting long enough for them to start their work and that they needed to move fast because time was running out. The very next day, they started constructing a road, which took them 10 days to complete. The road wound into the hills and disappeared between them. After that, for a few days, trucks filled with building materials would arrive and take the road into the hills, coming back empty again. Soon, there was daily activity of laborers going to the hills, every morning and returning each evening. Carlos himself, along with the architect, would join them each day. This carried on for 3 months, and then one day abruptly stopped. It was as if Valentina's so-called illness was timed to the completion of the activity in the hills, because a week later, Valentina started experiencing severe tummy pains. That night, Sofia and 2 of the maids spent all night with Valentina. The next morning at breakfast, the family was summoned for a meeting. Carlos informed them that their sister had given birth to a baby girl the previous night. He had informed the teacher that those who were still attending school would be late. They needed to use the morning to say goodbye to their sister. He had a house built for her in the hills, and that is where she and the child would live. None of them were ever to visit her. Only their mother and Ricardo, the 70-year-old houseboy, were to go there once a week to ensure she had all she needed. Yet, Carlos did not seem his usual confident self. He seemed shaken, and 5-year-old Rosario assumed it was because he was upset at his daughter's imminent departure. The morning was filled with a somber atmosphere as the siblings gathered to say their farewells. Valentina, pale but composed, held her newborn close. The baby girl, swaddled in a soft blanket with the face hidden from view, was a quiet reminder of the strange and troubling events that had transpired over the past months. The children, confused and saddened, could barely comprehend the gravity of the situation. They hugged Valentina tightly, tears streaming down their faces, and whispered their goodbyes. Rosario, being so young, could not fully understand why her beloved sister had to leave. She clung to Valentina, not wanting to let go, feeling a deep sense of loss and confusion. Valentina kissed her forehead and whispered reassuring words, though the sadness in her eyes betrayed her true feelings. As the sun began to rise, a small convoy of vehicles arrived to take Valentina and her baby to their new home in the hills. Sofia and Ricardo accompanied them, carrying supplies and essentials for the new house. Carlos watched from a distance, his face a mask of stoic resolve, but his eyes revealed a glimmer of regret and sorrow. The convoy disappeared into the hills, leaving behind a family grappling with the sudden and painful departure of their eldest daughter. The house felt emptier, and an unspoken heaviness hung in the air. The children, especially Rosario, struggled to adjust to the absence of Valentina, who had been such an integral part of their lives. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch slowly resumed its routine. However, the mysterious lights in the hills continued to appear, now viewed with a mix of fear and curiosity by those who saw them. The laborers spoke in hushed tones, their fear of the hills deepening. The morning after the departure of Valentina and her child was filled with multiple shocks for Rosario. Learning that her sister had been pregnant all along, had given birth under secretive circumstances, and now faced permanent exile was a heavy burden for her young mind to bear. Reflecting back, Rosario understood why Carlos had chosen to hide Valentina in the hills, to protect her from the community's judgment and from potential harm given the superstitious fear surrounding the lights. Sofia and Ricardo made their weekly trips to visit Valentina, returning with updates that were shared sparingly and cautiously. Valentina and her baby were reported to be healthy, though the isolation weighed heavily on her. The family adhered strictly to Carlos's edict, maintaining the secrecy and isolation that had been imposed upon them. Rosario herself, though young, keenly felt the absence of Valentina's presence. The house felt quieter, emptier, and the unspoken heaviness lingered. Her memories of Valentina, now shrouded in secrecy and solitude, became a cherished yet painful part of her childhood. The hills, once a place of mystery and fear, now held the secret of their family's heartache and resilience. The sad situation persisted for 3 long years until one Saturday evening at the dinner table, Sofia broke the usual somber silence by pleading with Carlos. "She wants to see Rosario. I implore you, Carlos. It's been 2 years." "Are you crazy, woman? After what her baby did to me the morning it was born. I'm not exposing Rosario to that demon child by letting her go there." Despite Carlos's staunch refusal, Sofia continued to protest every night without success. Frustrated and desperate, she finally issued an ultimatum. "Carlos, you should come to Mass with me once. Father Pedro and the sisters keep asking me why they never see Valentina anymore. If you don't allow me to take Rosario to Valentina, I will tell Father Pedro and the whole congregation how you banished our daughter," she said in a fearful tone. The threat worked. The following Friday, 7-year-old Rosario found herself in the truck sitting between her mother and Ricardo, heading towards the house nestled between the hills. Rosario vividly remembers the scene: a well-built, comfortable house with 2 or 3 bedrooms, surrounded by a small garden and a vegetable patch, situated at the bottom of a gentle valley next to a brook. Her sister, who appeared much older than Rosario remembered, greeted her with immense happiness. Though Valentina's appearance had changed, Rosario found solace in her sister's embrace. Rosario's anticipation was high, but she was surprised not to see the child anywhere around. She was instructed to stay close to her mother and sister and not to wander. Reflecting on this later, Rosario realized they deliberately kept the child away from her. Sofia, driven by her longing to see her grandchild, went to the rooms in what seemed like a determined effort to catch a glimpse of the baby. Everything went as usual on that 5th Saturday. Rosario was happy to see her sister. They had tea and biscuits and enjoyed lots of laughter and chatting. Still, the child was nowhere to be seen, and Rosario started to wonder if there truly was a child and what all the fuss was about. Curiosity was getting the better of her, and she insisted on going to the bathroom. Carlos, always providing the best in a material sense, had the house outfitted with an indoor toilet, which was a luxury for the time. Rosario was instructed not to visit the rooms, and Sofia considered, "She is taking her morning nap and, in any case, knows she can't come out anymore on Saturday mornings." As Rosario came out of the bathroom, she heard a child's voice chanting a rhyme in one of the bedrooms. Rosario slowly opened the door and saw the strangest thing. There, on the floor, sat a little girl who appeared not much younger than her. She had the fairest grayish skin and the whitest hair. When she looked up at Rosario, her unusually large head displayed 2 extra large, mysteriously black eyes. When the little one smiled at her, Rosario experienced both fear and wonderment. She thought it was frightful and beautiful at the same time. To Rosario, it seemed like Little Angel. It was a transformative moment for Sofia when she discovered Rosario and Emilia playing together in Emilia's room. Initially horrified, she was soon overwhelmed with relief. As Sofia, Emilia, and Rosario emerged hand in hand on the veranda, tears of joy streamed down Valentina's face as surprise gave way to relief and happiness. From that day on, Emilia was no longer kept hidden on Saturdays, and Rosario and Emilia's friendship blossomed in the weeks that followed. Despite Amelia's unusual appearance and her soft-spoken manner, which sometimes puzzled Rosario, their bond deepened. Rosario noticed peculiarities like Amelia not speaking verbally with her mother, but instead, mother and daughter would, from time to time, stare at each other for short moments. When Rosario inquired what it means, Amelia responded, "Mommy and I share thoughts." Rosario did not question it as it immediately made sense to her. To her, it seemed like the most natural form of communication between people who cared for each other, and she quietly felt a bit envious that she did not have the ability to share thoughts with her own loved ones. One Saturday morning by the brook, Amelia pointed toward some pebbles and said to Rosario, "Look." The next moment the pebbles were floating in the air. Rosario was exhilarated at discovering what Amelia is capable of. It was a moment of wonderment. Amelia, however, made her promise not to tell the adults what she shared with her, as her mother forbade her from doing such things in Rosario's presence. By the time Rosario was 11, Amelia appeared to be the same age. Valentina's health had deteriorated with each visit, causing Sophia increasing concern. The two girls had grown very close over the years, but Rosario began to notice something disturbing. Amelia had always disliked the small lizards that darted around the rocks by the brook, but now her dislike had turned into hatred. Rosario was horrified when she saw Amelia stunning a lizard simply by pointing at it, then picking up a rock and crushing its head. She was too shocked to say anything. As the weeks went on, Amelia's behavior became increasingly cruel. She would catch lizards by the brook, pull off their limbs while they were still alive, throw them on the ground and laugh hysterically as the little creatures tried to move. Then she would suddenly stomp on them. Rosario asked Amelia why she kept doing this. Amelia looked at her seriously with her huge eyes and said, "Because they are very, very bad." She never elaborated on what she meant. Rosario considered telling her mother about this behavior of Amelia, but did not want to get Amelia in trouble, so she kept it to herself. Rosario could not understand why this seemingly gentle friend of hers would be so heartlessly cruel. It made her very unhappy. By the age of 12, Amelia had outgrown Rosario, marking another turning point in their lives. Valentina now looked thoroughly worn out, appearing much older than her real age and sickly. One Saturday during a visit, Rosario recalled her thoughts repeating themselves. Then other thoughts followed, questioning the first thoughts in a jumbled mess. It felt like her mind was running around and she had no control over it. She turned around and noticed Amelia staring at her. And then a threatening voice echoed in her head. "Don't look at me. Look away." It was Amelia. She was in Rosario's mind. The following weekend, Rosario did not want to visit Valentina and Amelia, choosing to stay home instead. In the months that followed, she continued to stay home and never went back. At the age of 13, she finally asked her father what Valentina's baby did to him the morning after its birth. He took her to his office and said, "I assume the girl is the reason you never went back. I could not stop you from going because of your mother's threat to tell Father Pedro." An unusual display of courage for your mother, I must say. I could not chance it. I am glad you're not going to the hills anymore, Rosario. I will tell you this, but you must keep it to yourself. That morning, when I looked at that baby, I heard a screeching noise in my head. It was so bad it caused me enormous pain, but worse, it filled me with a sense of death. Not normal death like when your grandparents passed peacefully and went to heaven, but something evil, something hellish. A week later, the lights over the hills reappeared. One night, the activity was so intense that the family again stood on the veranda, watching in awe and fear. Sophia felt a deep concern for her daughter, who lived out there. She wanted to go the next day to check on her, but Carlos forbade it. The following night, a light again appeared late while everyone was sleeping. The family went outside, just as they had done many years earlier. The same light hovered over the garden. As they watched, they heard a deep sigh coming from Carlos. When the family looked, they saw him collapse. They rushed to him, but he was unconscious. Then the light shot straight upwards at high speed. By the time the doctor arrived later that night, he declared Carlos dead. The next day, Sofia, Ricardo, and Juan got into the truck and drove off to the hills. When they arrived at Valentina's house, they found her sitting on the stairs to the veranda, looking thoroughly morbid, her mind seemingly elsewhere. In the meantime, Sofia went looking for Emilia, but could not find her. When she returned, Valentina had come to, and Sofia asked where her child was. All Valentina could utter was, "They took her in the light." After that, my uncles Juan and Diego took charge of the ranch and the neighboring farm, which also belonged to Carlos. Most of the sisters went off to Buenos Aires to study as they came of age. Being a wealthy family, the sisters were part of the pioneering generation of women to become tertiary educated. Juan brought Valentina back home, and when he eventually got married, he had a beautiful villa built for her and their mother, Sofia, where both lived out their lives. My mother, Rosario, met a geology student at university. My father later became a foremost academic in his field, and my mother became a dentist. During one of our vacations, my father visited the Hills of the Lights and pronounced that there was geologically nothing strange about the place. He even had a meteorologist colleague investigate, and they couldn't find any reason for the strange occurrences of the past. Of course, my mother never told him the full story until much later in her life. I still have contact with my cousins who now farm out there. The lights, which appeared so many years ago and irrevocably affected my family, have never appeared again since the night my grandfather passed away. Yours faithfully, Carlos Jr. Thank you for listening to these incredible stories. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating tales. Hit the bell icon to get notified whenever we post a new video. See you next time.